Now don't get us wrong, at the making fun of Vince McMahon Olympics, what culture are a guaranteed podium finish, but it would be downright blinkered to say that Vince McMahon doesn't know a fair bit about wrestling. The general consensus is that Big Granddaddy V has lost sight of what the average wrestling fan wants, so he should step down, even though he never had that much creative vision to begin with. That last point is especially bollocks. While it's true that WWE has had a lot of creative missteps in the last few years, and some of WWE's most treasured characters like Stone Cold, The Rock, and Hulk Hogan were extensions of the people playing them rather than true creations of Vince, the McMahon Ideas Factory has created its fair share of absolute barnstormers, whether you like to admit it or not. I'm Plumpy from WhatCulture.com, and here are the 10 greatest Vince McMahon creations. Number 10, Braun Strowman. Let's start with the most recent and most conclusive proof that, say what you want about this terrifying septuagenarian, he's occasionally f***ing right, and we're occasionally f***ing wrong. During his first year on the main roster, you could probably count the number of people who thought that Braun Strowman would deserve to main event SummerSlam 2017 on one hand, and that's pretty much just his immediate family, and maybe not even all of them. But Vince saw something in Braun, repackaged him as the monster amongst men we see today, and with the right application of mostly consistent booking and the odd jaw-dropping stunt, he's created the kind of novelty attraction that makes every single card better for its presence. Unbelievable. Number 9, Goldust. Vince McMahon is a crass man. He's a crass man. Come on. Vincent has a somewhat vulgar sense of humour. He enjoys poo being dropped on people, midgets dancing around, and for some reason is obsessed with incest. Sometimes that sensibility creates something horrific, sometimes it creates something wonderfully bizarre. Now, to be straight, pun intended, Goldust was far from a perfect creation. He was, after all, gay panic in human form, who got people to hate him by acting all queer and that, which is capital letters not cool. But credit to Vince, his creation endured. It was iconic, unremittingly strange, and yet latched onto something inherent to human sensibilities, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. Long after Goldust was transitioned away from being explicitly about gay people, he's still around to this day and is still popular. Number 8, JBL. Well, you know what they say, write what you know, and Vince McMahon sure knows a lot about being a crazy right-wing dollar bastard. JBL was one of Vince's fully formed creations, dropping into SmackDown programming out of nowhere, and despite Bradshaw festering in the mid-card for the past few years, was expected to be taken seriously as a main eventer, and hell, even a stop John o'clock is right twice a day, and the act flourished. A combination of committing to his hateful title reign, total believability from Mr. Layfield's performance, and often inventive shtick created a top-level character from out of nowhere. If only they'd been quite so creative in the character department when shortcutting Jinder to the top. Number 7, Mr. Perfect. Vinny MC didn't foster the talents of Kurt Hennig, who had already been AWA heavyweight champion for over a year before he stepped foot on WWE television, but Vince sure as shit knew the best way to package him. Vince realized that Hennig was probably the best young in-ring competitor to cross his path in years, and gave him the single greatest welcome of any debuting star. He gave him the Mr. Perfect introductory vignettes. Now those are crucial to building hype for a debut, shining stars. Bad example, Mr. Perfect, the best possible. By the time the gimmick of Mr. Perfect, which was basically I am good at all the things, when he stepped into the ring, fans were conditioned to expect brilliance, and by God, they got it. Half of building superstars is good marketing, and occasionally, Vince was perfect at it. Number 6, The Ultimate Warrior. It requires a master salesman to take someone as limited in the ring as Jim Hellwig and turn him into the kind of pop culture spanning phenomenon capable of besting Hulk Hogan in the main event of WrestleMania. The whole presentation of The Ultimate Warrior was engineered by Vince McMahon. Sure, Hellwig was already going by the Dingo Warrior on the circuit, but he didn't have the neon face paint, the cool name, the best entrance music ever, or even the careful concealment of his weaknesses by the judicious application of squash matches. In the wrestling industry, half of creation is taking a rough product and retooling it to its optimum state. Very much the Braun Strowman strategy, memorable squashes and moments until they're competent enough to shine under a wider spotlight. Number 5, the $1 Million Man. Tempted to write CJBL and call it a day, but in actual fact this is even more of a personal gimmick for Vince. Way back in the day, Crazy Vince wanted to be even crazier and trained to be a pro wrestler until he was talked out of it by his dad. The gimmick he wanted for himself, the $1 Million Man, which he gave to Ted DiBiase upon poaching him from Mid-South Wrestling. It was brilliant from day one, the perfect antagonist to McMahon's predominantly working class fan base. The obvious love that Vince had for the gimmick was in full display in the pure wealth of ideas that came with it. The money in the mouth, the manservant, the personalized title belt, the suits, the audience challenges, which themselves are genuinely some of the best heel shtick ever recorded. Number 4, Kurt Angle. Like Mr. Perfect before him, Vince did not engineer the talent of the Olympic gold medalist. It's often been remarked in interviews that Angle was one of the quickest people to pick up the art of pro wrestling that ever donned a singlet. But the stroke of genius that can be attributed to Vince was taking a man who had publicly and legitimately won gold for his country and debuting him as a motherfucking heel. You could argue that it was the product of the ultra cynicism of the 90s, but making an Olympic hero into a whiny, prudish, holier-than-thou dickhead was the absolute key to unlocking Angle's early potential, and the guy performed the gimmick so beautifully that it's hard to imagine him being debuted any other way, which is madness because when you look at it with fresh eyes, it screams white meat babyface. Number 3, Mr. McMahon. It's sort of lovely that despite apparently being reluctant to become a prominent character on the show, Vince finally got to dust off a modern version of the $1 Million Man gimmick he'd always wanted to play. And he very almost saved the best character for himself. If it's true that the best gimmicks are ones that are essentially the human being but turned up to 11, then Vince McMahon is just the worst person born. While it's true that the evil McMahon shtick has occasionally been a plague on the product, there can be no denying that's one of the most important creations in the whole of wrestling, not only being constantly entertaining in its own right, but also helping to act as springboard for acts like Austin, The Rock, and Mankind to cement themselves in the hearts of his audience. Number 2, The Undertaker. Do you ever stop and try to look at the gimmick of The Undertaker with fresh eyes? Just try and disregard the last 25 years of amazing moments and just try to put yourself in the position of WWE creative back in 1990. You're presented with this tall redhead called Mean Mark Callis. What do you do with him? Would any of us have had the foresight to think that undead Wild West Boot Hill voodoo priest would not only last a year but become the single greatest gimmick in the history of wrestling? Sure, lots of that is down to the performance chops of Mark Calloway, but Vince created the gimmick, Vince ensured he was marketed perfectly, and Vince booked him incredibly strongly. He's unquestionably Vince's greatest human creation, which could only leave number 1, WrestleMania. Truth be told, Vince didn't invent the idea of closed-circuit taping, which would become the precursor to the pay-per-view model that defined pro wrestling for the better part of 30 years. Starrcade did it in 1983, a year and a half before the first Mania. But while Starrcades were wrestling supercards dedicated purely to wrestling and stars within that industry, it was Vince McMahon's vision to cross-pollinate the superstars of the ring with the superstars of radio and small screen. In reaching out to sports deities like Muhammad Ali, TV megastars like Mr. T, and music stars like Liberace, and in the year previous Cyndi Lauper, McMahon pioneered wrestling as a novelty mainstream attraction. With the success of WrestleMania, he wrote the blueprint for a sports and entertainment formula that would leave the purist Starrcade in the dust and place him atop the wrestling world, a position he maintains to this day, whether you like it or not. And that's our list. Did we miss any out? Tell us about it in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. I'm Plumpy from WhatCulture.com, and I'll see you soon.